Today, more than ever, women are being led to believe that when their body falls silent, when desire lessens, when the hunger for attention fades, something is wrong. That silence must mean emptiness, a void, a failure of emotion or passion. But what if we've misunderstood it entirely? What if that silence is not absence, but the soul's first whisper? A quiet voice, long drowned out by noise, now rising gently to be heard. This isn't about repression. It's not about denial or shame. It's about transmutation, about a woman who, consciously or not, begins to pull away from the games of desire, the performances of affection, the cycles of seeking and being sought. She stops, not because she has nothing to feel, but because something far deeper begins to awaken. She is not turning away from love. She is turning toward herself. Carl Jung spoke of the shadow, the parts of ourselves we hide, deny or neglect, but which continue to shape our fate from the dark. When a woman stops chasing validation, when her body quiets and her gaze turns inward, this is not the end of something. It is the beginning of a shadow encounter, a moment when she begins to meet herself without mirrors, when she no longer asks, "Do they want me?" but, "What do I truly want?" In this pause, she steps out of performance. The mask falls, and with it, the need to be chosen fades. She no longer performs to receive affection. She no longer offers love in exchange for approval. She begins to hold space for herself in a way the world rarely teaches. The silence becomes a sacred ritual. The absence becomes abundance. And yet, this path is not easy. It is not glamorous or Instagrammable. At first, the world may not notice. Then it begins to question. Friends worry. Family wonders. They tell her to get out more, to open herself up, to stop overthinking. But this is not isolation. This is immersion, a descent into the depths the surface world fears. Have you ever noticed how many women, after periods of celibacy, speak of a spiritual awakening? More vivid dreams, sharper intuitions, a magnetic clarity in their presence. This is not coincidence. This is a calling. When the body is no longer consumed by external gratification, when it is no longer chasing or being chased, something sacred stirs. A woman who chooses silence is not collapsing. She is preparing. She is creating space not for lack, but for revelation. And that space, the void society fears so deeply, is the birthplace of power. There is a moment, subtle but seismic, when she begins to see through things, through old patterns, past relationships that once felt necessary but now look like cycles. She begins to recognize how often she sought love not for its truth but for its comfort. How often she confused being wanted with being worthy. This realization does not come gently. It aches, because it asks her to let go of who she was before she knew better. And in that ache, a transformation begins. The archetype of the wild woman begins to awaken, not the one tamed by roles or by expectations, but the instinctual self, primal, wise, sovereign. She does not exist to entertain or to be possessed. She does not crave the spotlight, for her power grows in silence. She is not loud, but she is undeniable. Society doesn't know what to do with a woman who no longer needs to be desired, because she becomes unpredictable, mysterious. She stops following the rules that were never hers to begin with, and so she is mislabeled, cold, detached, difficult. But what they cannot see is that she is not empty, she is expanding. This moment, this quiet rebellion, can feel terrifying, because for the first time, she is no longer leaning on the old structures. She is not the girlfriend, the lover, the muse. She is just herself. And in a culture that teaches women to define themselves by how they are seen, this unseeable self feels like exile. But it is not exile, it is return. To the body not as object but as oracle. To emotion not as chaos but as compass. To solitude not as punishment but as practice. What is unfolding is a shedding of false selves, a remembering, a homecoming, and maybe, just maybe, if you are still reading this, something in you is stirring too. Maybe you have felt the whisper, the restlessness, the longing that has no name, a desire not for someone else but for yourself, for a truth you can't yet speak, but feel pulsing underneath your skin. This is not fragility. This is the first call. So pause here, breathe. Ask yourself gently but honestly, what in me is tired of seeking? What have I been afraid to feel without distraction? What parts of me have I only ever met through another's gaze? Let the questions sit. Don't rush to answer them, because this journey, if you choose to walk it, is not about reaching quickly. It's about unraveling slowly, about noticing the inner shifts, the subtle changes in rhythm, about recognizing that silence is not the absence of love. It is the beginning of self-love that is not dependent on feedback or performance. So here's a gentle invitation. Loop in. Take a moment right now and write in the comments. Have you ever felt this silence? What shifted in you when the noise stopped? What are you discovering in the space where desire used to be? Your voice may be the reflection someone else needs. And in that sharing, we begin to remember, we are not alone. There comes a moment in every woman's life when the silence becomes almost unbearable, not because it is empty, but because it begins to echo with everything she once silenced within herself. And this is where the real journey begins. Not in the moment she withdraws, but in what she encounters once she does. At first it feels like disorientation. The familiar patterns are no longer present. The flirtations, the attention, the subtle feedback loops that made her feel seen, even when those glances never truly saw her. Now there is no mirror, just her mind, her memories, her longings, her fears. And this is the descent. Carl Jung called it the confrontation with the shadow, the peeling away of the identities we built to belong, to be loved, to be safe. The ego, once dominant, starts to panic. Who are you without this? It whispers. Why would you step away from what made you feel alive? And she doesn't always have an answer. Not at first. Because walking away from superficial connection does not feel like power in the beginning. It feels like absence, loneliness, confusion, like standing at the edge of a cliff and not knowing if she's meant to fall or fly. Old thoughts return. Am I wasting time? Youth? Beauty? Society is relentless in reminding her that time is limited, that her value has an expiration date, that if she's not being seen, she might as well not exist. The pressure is subtle but insidious. This is the test, the symbolic journey, and it is here that many women turn back, not because they are weak, but because the world has not prepared them for this kind of silence. We are taught to be desired, not to be alone, to perform, not to pause, to seek love, not to embody it. But the woman who stays, who remains even through the ache, is being restructured from within. She starts to notice the old patterns surfacing like ghosts, the temptation to call someone from the past, to accept attention that once felt flattering but now rings hollow. Invitations reappear, easy comfort, familiar dynamics, shallow affection that looks like warmth but leaves her cold. Everything seems to want to test her resolve. And this is the paradox. The silence she chose begins to feel like punishment. But it's not. It is initiation. The soul does not expand in comfort. It expands in confrontation. And the confrontation is not with others. It's with herself. With the version of her that adapted to survive, to be liked, to fit into a mold. That version now resists being unraveled. But it must be, because the woman she is becoming cannot fit into that mold anymore. There is a deep discomfort that arises, a sense of invisibility. She is no longer playing the game of desire, and so the world doesn't know where to place her. She is not the seductress, not the wife, not the muse. She is just herself. And that hurts more than any breakup, because it is the death of identity. But every death, when honored, births something new, and in the silence, something else begins to stir. She starts to hear a different voice, not the ego's fear but the soul's calm insistence. Stay, it says. This discomfort is sacred. It doesn't shout. It doesn't demand. It simply accompanies a silent presence, a knowing that something important is happening. This is what Jung meant by the soul taking the lead. When the ego can no longer control the narrative, the unconscious begins to surface, and the woman must now face what she has denied. Old wounds, childhood beliefs, cultural conditioning, all rise like waves, not to drown her, but to cleanse her. And slowly something shifts. The nights that once felt endless become portals. Her dreams become richer, layered with symbols. Her body, once restless, begins to feel like a sanctuary. She no longer wants to be touched out of habit. She wants to be touched by truth. She begins to ask new questions. Why did I need to be chosen to feel valuable? Why did I confuse desire with love? What does it mean to be with myself, not in loneliness, but in sovereignty? These are not rhetorical questions. They are keys. And as she holds them, she begins to unlock forgotten parts of herself. She remembers what it feels like to exist without needing to be seen. What it feels like to dress for her own gaze, to dance in her kitchen not for attention but for joy, to sit in stillness and realize she is not waiting. She is arriving. The transformation deepens. She no longer wants to numb her longing. She wants to understand it. She wants to transmute it. And that's when she begins to see. Abstinence is not about deprivation. It is about clarity. It is not a pause from life. It is life distilled to its essence. She begins to feel her vital energy not as suppressed, but as gathered. It is not sleeping. It is preparing for what? Even she doesn't fully know. But she can feel it, in her bones, in her breath, in the way she walks, slower now, grounded. She is becoming more difficult to impress, not out of arrogance, but discernment. Her time is sacred. Her body is sacred. Her silence is sacred. She is not above love. She is just no longer hungry for it in its half-formed state. She does not fear being alone anymore, because she is not alone. She is accompanied by a version of herself she is only now getting to know, and that self is powerful. This stage is not about arrival. It is about remembering. It is about reclaiming every fragment she gave away in exchange for affection. It is about becoming whole without permission. And perhaps, right now, you are somewhere in this process. Maybe you've started to withdraw. Maybe the silence feels heavy. Maybe the old patterns are knocking. Maybe you're wondering if something is wrong with you. Let me tell you, it's not wrong. It's sacred. So here's the loop for reflection. What is the shadow asking you to face? What would happen if you stayed just a little longer in the discomfort instead of filling it? What have you been running from that might actually be the way through? Share your experience below. Your words could become someone else's light. Because this is not the end. It's the middle of the most important transformation of your life. The woman who walks through the fire of her own silence never returns the same. She doesn't come back seeking approval, applause, or validation. She returns with something far more powerful: sovereignty. She has faced herself, not just the polished parts, but the messy, raw, aching truths she once buried under performance and expectation. She has cried in the quiet, battled the invisible, held her own trembling hands in the dark. And because of this, she now stands not as a version of who she was, but as a revelation of who she always was beneath the noise. She is no longer someone to be chosen. She is now someone who chooses, not out of fear, not from emptiness, but from overflow. What once felt like deprivation, nights without touch, days without validation, was never lack. It was gestation. The body that fell silent wasn't closing down. It was building a temple, and now that temple pulses with presence. She is not in a rush to fill silence anymore. She has learned to trust it. She has seen what it births. Her longing has become discernment. Her loneliness has become self-intimacy. She understands now that not everything that touches the body nourishes the soul. When she steps into the world again, she moves differently. She speaks slower, listens deeper. She is no longer willing to shrink to be understood. She knows now. The ones meant to meet her will rise to her frequency, not pull her down to theirs. Love, for her, will never again be a negotiation. It will be resonance. It will not come to complete her, but to accompany her. And that's why she can wait, not passively, but with active presence. Because her wholeness is not on hold. It is already here. Carl Jung wrote that, "What we do not bring to consciousness appears in our lives as fate." But she has brought it all to light. The projections, the wounds, the inherited stories. She no longer confuses attraction with destiny. She can look at a pattern and say, "I see you, but I choose differently now." And this frightens the world, because a woman who has crossed through her own darkness and returned whole cannot be manipulated. She is not swayed by flattery or seduced by promises that cost her peace. She is not impressed by temporary attention, because she has learned to give herself eternal presence. She no longer needs to be the lover, the muse, the fixation. She is the source, the fire, the frequency. And when she loves now, it is not because she needs to. It is because her soul has room for it. This woman is not against relationships. She is simply no longer willing to use them to escape herself. And that changes everything. Her standards are not born from ego, but from wisdom. Her boundaries are not walls, but sacred gates. She honors her time, her energy, her heart. She does not offer them to those who are not ready to hold them with reverence. She sees red flags now not as romantic challenges, but as warnings from her soul. She doesn't try to rescue anymore. She doesn't fall for potential. She is not here to mother or mend. She is here to be met. And in this stillness, this clarity, she begins to create, not just art or words, but a life that mirrors her inner world, a life that does not apologize for its intensity or its softness, a life that reflects her full spectrum. She becomes a mirror to others, not by preaching, but by presence. Her energy speaks. Her choices teach, and without saying a word, she invites others into their own awakening. This is not about superiority. It is about embodiment. And yet she still feels. She still weeps at times, still aches, but she no longer collapses into the ache. She holds it. She honors it. Her pain is no longer a cage. It is a teacher. She has made peace with her past. Not because it was easy, but because she no longer wants to carry it forward. She's not interested in retelling the same story. She is here to write a new one where her silence is sacred, where her solitude is strength, where her body is not a currency for affection, but a sanctuary of wisdom, where her soul speaks louder than any noise around her. And when love comes, and it will not find a desperate woman. It will find a woman full, a woman who doesn't need love to complete her, but who welcomes it to expand her. She is no longer available for half-love, almosts, or emotional scraps. She does not chase. She does not beg. She does not cling. She chooses. And what she chooses now is truth. If something requires her to abandon herself, it is no longer love. If something feels heavy in her gut, she listens. Her body is no longer confused. It is her compass. The world may not understand this transformation. It may label her cold, detached, even intimidating. But she is not here to be understood. She is here to be true. And in being true, she gives others permission to do the same. This is the sacred loop we now return to. Have you felt this rising within yourself? Are you in the midst of your silence, or walking out of it? What have you learned in the space where you once felt only absence? Share your story. Speak the truth of your own transformation. Let this message not be the end, but the beginning of your own voice reclaiming its power. Because the woman who has crossed the threshold of abstinence with awareness is no longer afraid of the dark. She has become light, and that light disturbs, awakens, guides. Her body is no longer quiet out of fear. It is quiet because it is listening. It is choosing. It is aligned. And when she moves again, when she loves again, it will not be to be completed, but to co-create. She will not return to the world to beg for a seat. She is the table. She has made peace with absence. She has woven silence into her soul. She has alchemized her longing into power. She is no longer waiting. She has arrived. And if you are here, reading these final words, maybe you are arriving too. Not back to who you were, but into who you've always been meant to be.